Hi, Linda Berens here with a message for you about measuring personality type. For many years, I did MBTI qualifying programs. They're now called certification programs. And we taught the tests and measures component in there. And we had to teach people about how to evaluate a personality instrument. And I always was puzzled, why are we calling it measures? Because you can't really measure a type. A type is a category. It's a thing. It either is in that category or not. And of course, almost all categories are somewhat arbitrary, but even though the ones that are based on nature. But with a typology, you can't measure it because how much of it isn't what it's about. It's about identifying what is the pattern of the personality. Personality type can only be mapped, not measured. But what can you measure? Well, you can measure traits, specific characteristics, and how much of that you exhibit. And a personality type is not necessarily identified by the presence of only one trait. It's about different traits or characteristics in relation to each other and what role those traits play in the personality. You can sometimes measure states, like a sleeping state, a dreaming state, states of altered consciousness. But you really can't measure types. So when we're talking about a type, we're talking about a pattern that is there, and it tends to be constant. But we can identify these patterns in many things, not just the personality patterns, the personality of an individual. So one of the things we have to understand about figuring out who are we and what are our personality patterns is to differentiate these different selves we have. One of the selves that we have is what we call the contextual self. This is your current behavior, the way you respond to the needs of a situation. This is where you're most adaptable, where your behavior can vary a lot. Now, when you take a personality assessment or you go through a self-discovery process to try to determine what your personality pattern is, you may wind up thinking about one of your contextual selves. If you're at work and you're in a workshop at work, you may be thinking about the roles that you play there and what you're like in that situation. So that's your contextual self. So it's important at times to be able to talk about what your personality pattern is at work. And then there is this core self, what we have evidence for, that it's our innate core self. So sometimes when we're taking a personality assessment or we're going through a self-discovery process, we are encouraged to identify what is your innate core self. Sometimes people talk about it as your shoes off, at-home shoes off self. Well, I can tell you that my at-home shoes off self isn't really my natural innate core self. I'm really more myself at work, but that's just me, might not be you. And they're all still really part of you. They're all still part of that wonderful, rich aspect of you that makes you human. So there's this innate core self that has an urge to behave in a certain way, and then there's the current behavior, the situations where the environment is pushing on it. And out of that, we tend to adapt and grow. And that becomes our developed self. So it's all there. And we adapt to the external pressures, we grow as a response to that, and we adapt to our responses to the internal pressures to grow and develop in a certain way, because we know that that's what people do. A little baby doesn't have to be taught to walk or to talk or to pick up objects and play with them. It's just a natural thing to do. And they develop skill in it because they engage in it, and their bodies developed and all of that supported. Our personalities are like that too. So we develop. And that's an internal push that's pushing us to develop. And then there is this aspect of adapting to the environment. And sometimes we're in environments where this innate core self really didn't get to express itself. And in those cases, we adapt. And it can become so strong, it takes us a while to figure out what is really at our core. So we have this developed self. Now, development is natural, it's ongoing, and we also have what I call this developing self, or this emerging self. That's part of identifying this pattern of what we're growing into. And we can use typology models to help get us there. We can use development models to help us understand what's going on. But it is an important aspect of who we are. Now, when we're trying to measure or identify our personality type, we have to recognize that we're constantly developing, and yet the pattern stays the same. And this pattern that is there from the beginning has like a driver to it. In the typologies that are really true typologies, there is some sort of driver to the personality that's unconscious. And we're not really aware of it because we don't get a language for how to talk about it. But this driver has certain tendencies to make us want to do certain things. And that's an important piece in helping us understand why getting to the core self is important, because it's going to influence our behavior. And it can give us a nice roadmap for our developmental pattern, what drives us, what pushes us to do things a certain way, what we value, what our core beliefs are. Lots of various aspects of this core self. So when we're working with personality types, we want people to find that because it opens up a whole rich arena of behaviors that they may not have been able to claim and own before, or help them understand why they're so driven to do things. It can help them understand their deep motivations and their drives. So it's an important thing to do, but we can't measure it. It isn't how much of it you have. You can use instruments to help you identify type. So an instrument used to say paper pencil, but now it's usually online, where you're asked to choose among options or to put things on a rating scale. What an instrument gives us is a data point. And of course, the more things it measures, it gives us multiple data points. That data point taken by itself is not enough. And the reason it's not enough is that very often you capture the contextual self. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you capture the developed self and the developing self, what we're really aspiring to become. And sometimes we capture the core self, so we don't know what we have all the time when we have that. So what the instrument is, in good tests and measures or ethical use of instruments requires, is that you have an ongoing self-exploration that the person goes through, where you interact with some material, with a facilitator, to identify what is your best fit. And getting to that core self would be your best fit. But always remember, that's not all of who you are. And if you're a professional using these models to help people in coaching them, or in leadership development, or team development, organizational development, or all kinds of other environments like counseling, just know that it's only one data point. And you can't say from that data point if it was 100% accurate. So we have also another way, which is the one I use and have been using for a number of years. It's a self-discovery process of self-exploration, using a variety of activities and workshops, feedback from people, descriptions, really well-written descriptions based on experiences with people who have that pattern. Some of the descriptions are written in the first person and they're narratives. Sometimes people relate better to a list of bullet points, but giving people a variety of ways to discover the pattern for themselves and how well that fits. But it doesn't matter what method you're using. All of these have measurement error. So you can't use them for selection. It's very challenging to try to make a selection of who's going to be good at this job without also gathering some trait information and people's observing their skill level, all kinds of other kinds of information. If you use it for just a data point, say an instrument, or even a self-discovery process, we can't attribute someone's behavior or their success to that. And their behavior is just that. It's their behavior. We can exhibit behavior that lines up with many different personality patterns. So how do you control for measurement error? This is an important piece to understand when you're looking at instruments. Well, the first thing is you carefully select the method that you're going to use. And if you're going to use an instrument, then there's a whole lot of other stuff I'll talk about later. So how do you control for measurement error? Well, the first thing is you're going to select the method you're going to use. And choose one that's appropriate for the situation. If you're going to use an instrument, then you have a whole lot of other questions to answer, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. You also want to assess, is it safe? You want to set the frame for safety. You want to put people at ease. People don't want to be put in a box. They don't want to be categorized. They don't want to be typecast. So there are all kinds of things that we teach people to do in our training programs about how to set that frame and how to get people thinking in ways as they make their selections, or they're going through this, if you're doing a self-discovery process that doesn't involve an instrument, and by the way, you can use them both together, that's fine. You want to get them in that frame of mind. And that frame of mind is they're looking for their core self. And there are some activities that you can do to ask them about the way they are at home, the way they are at work, and elicit that contextual self so that they start to see the different aspects of themselves. And then the whole way you administer the instrument, or set it all up if you're using an instrument, really makes a big difference in terms of how accurate it is, how safe people feel to self-disclose. Now, this stuff is not unsafe. It's the personality models, at least the ones that we use, of temperament or essential motivators or interaction styles or the Jungian-based cognitive dynamics, all of those, we talk about people in a very positive way. So setting it up so people know that it's not about pathology, it's about your strengths. You may identify some blind spots, things like that. And you want to verify interactively with the individuals as to their fit. I do that a lot in a classroom setting where we have group activities. They get feedback, especially if they're with people they know. They can get feedback about how they see themselves versus how they see others. So it's an art, this possibility, but you need to do that. However, one of the reasons I'm doing this video for you is I really want to give you the very minimum kinds of information you need to know about evaluating instruments. One of the ways that when you find an instrument that's going to be right for your population, you think it's the right measure and the right model that it's looking for, is reliability. And that's the first thing. And reliability is really just consistency. Your car. Hopefully your car is reliable. You go out, you start it, it takes off, you don't have to worry about it. If it starts to mess up once in a while, you may decide you want a new car. But you choose a car for one that has a good record for repair, for example, so that it's going to be there for you. It's going to be reliable. There's also, there are statistics to do all of this stuff. And I don't speak statistics very well, but you need to know a little bit about how to read those things if you're going to look at it. But internal consistency is to look and see are the items in an instrument that load on something, say like extroversion and introversion, are they internally consistent? Are they all loading on that, or are they loading on something else? Now we have computers that are so sophisticated and people who understand instruments and statistics that we have much more sophisticated ways of measuring all of these things. And just know that the measurement here is on the performance of the instrument, not the accuracy of it. Accuracy comes in under validity. And I think about validity as truth. Does it get at what is really there? Does it help you identify what is really there? Now, of course, what is really there is very hard to pin down. But people have a sense of themselves. They get feedback from others. So we're looking for, does it measure what it says it's going to measure? Does the instrument do what it says it's going to do? Validity is also about use. How do you use it, and is it useful? And a friend of mine told me this, actually his name was Mark Majors, gave me this example. So if you have your car, you get in your car and you go to the mall and park it in the parking and you go shopping. Okay, you go to the grocery store or whatever, or you go into one of those big parking structures. All right, a car is really well suited for that. It's valid for that use. But if you have a big piece of heavy equipment like a backhoe or I don't even know the names of these pieces of equipment, but if you have one of these big equipments and you go shopping with it, you're going to have a little trouble. You're going to have trouble parking it. You're going to have trouble maneuvering it. And when you buy all your packages, where are you going to put them? Right? So it's not valid for that use. So instruments are valid for some uses and some not. And there's some language I just want to acquaint you with because you'll find them. Face validity is, does it look like what it's doing? And some things you need face validity, some things you don't. And some of the more sophisticated personality instruments, some of the questions don't really have much face validity. You can't really tell. As long as they work and get at it, it's okay. But you want it to have enough face validity that people are willing to participate. Now, content validity really doesn't say anything about its accuracy. It just says, does it cover the whole content of what you're talking about? So if you were looking at Jungian personality theory and you didn't have any introversion, extroversion items, anything that tried to get at one's preference for that, for introversion over extroversion or extroversion over introversion, then you wouldn't have good content validity. So that's pretty easy to discern as long as you know the models. You have to know the domain yourself in order to assess that. With personality instruments, most often we're looking at construct validity. In other words, the theories or the constructs behind it. And they do some things like factor analysis, find out which factors cluster together. They do correlations with behavior, correlations with other measures. They do a whole lot of more sophisticated measures of construct validity. The one that I think is most powerful is best fit type studies. Giving the instrument and then getting the agreement that this fits the person. And of course, that's always the person's self-awareness, self-reflectiveness, and how well can they do that. But if you're working with a practice professional, you can get to a best fit by the skillful feedback that is given to the person and the uses of the tools that have good descriptions. Okay, so best fit type studies. With personality type, that's really the best way. It's not the only way to assess whether or not there's good construct validity, but we do want it to have a high percentage, and this is just percentage. If there are 16 personality types, I think the odds of getting all those letters lined up is like 6%. So, a percent agreement that's pretty high is pretty good, really. Okay. Now, the other kind of validity is criterion validity. And criterion validity studies are not often done in the typology world, but if you're going to use an instrument to hire someone, to fire someone, to find a mate, you have to show that there's some kind of criterion that can predict success. And that one, if you're going to use it for those life-changing decisions, you need to do the research to find that. So we're looking at personality type, and can you measure it? You really can map it. And what's beautiful about a really good typological model is that it describes these unconscious processes. It gives us a map for our patterns and our talents, and it can help us be more conscious and more aware, and it can give us an idea of what other people's perspectives are and therefore contribute to our development. So keeping in mind that when you were a child, you were same pattern. If you look at pictures of you as a child and you can say, oh, look at me, I can see something that looks just like me. Or let's say you gained a lot of weight. You can still identify some characteristics. So there's still some characteristics that continue over time. And what we're trying to do with personality measurement is try to identify the patterns so we have more information so we can be more self-aware and make better decisions and better manage our lives and be more satisfied, have a greater sense of well-being. I hope you found this useful, and if you want more information, you can get more information at lindaberens.com.